There's a version of you that exists only in your head. The one who got the call back. The one who got picked. The one who heard their name. You've probably met that version more than once. Maybe it was a job you didn't get, but you got close. Final round. Final two. The recruiter said it was an incredibly tough decision, and for some reason that sentence didn't comfort you. It haunted you. Maybe it was someone you loved, who almost loved you back, who said, "I just need more time," or "You're amazing, but," and left you standing in a doorway that never fully closed. Maybe it was smaller than that, a competition, a test score, a promotion that went to someone else, someone you could picture, by name, in the role that was supposed to be yours. Here's the strange part. If you had lost badly, if you'd never had a chance at all, you probably would have moved on by now. But you didn't lose badly, you almost won. And somehow that's the version of the story your mind refuses to let go of. Why does almost winning sometimes hurt more than completely failing? In 1995, a group of psychologists sat down with hours of Olympic footage and did something nobody had really done before. They didn't watch the medal ceremonies for the athletes' performances, they watched their faces. Not the moment they stepped onto the podium, the moment right after they realized what they'd won. And the results didn't make sense at first. The bronze medalists, the third-place finishers, looked happy, relieved. Some of them were smiling, laughing, hugging strangers. The silver medalists, the ones who came second, the ones who were objectively better, faster, closer to gold, looked like they'd lost something. Because in their minds, they had. The bronze medalist's brain was comparing itself to fourth place, to no medal at all, to going home with nothing. Compared to that, silver would have felt like a miracle. But the silver medalist's brain wasn't comparing itself to fourth place. It was comparing itself to gold. And that one shift, that single change in the comparison point, was enough to turn a genuine achievement into a private grief. Think about that. This is what researchers now call the silver medal effect. But it isn't really about medals. It's about proximity. The closer you get to something, the more your brain treats the distance that remains, not the distance you've already crossed, as the only thing that matters. Here's where it gets darker. Your brain doesn't just compare you to the winner. It starts building a version of events where you were the winner. Psychologists call this counterfactual thinking, but that phrase doesn't capture what it actually feels like from the inside. It doesn't feel like thinking. It feels like memory. You don't replay what happened. You replay what almost happened. If I had answered that question differently. If I had sent the message first. If I had left 5 minutes earlier. If I had just said the right thing at the right moment. Your mind doesn't file this as imagination. It files it as evidence. Evidence of a life that was one decision away from being yours. And the closer you were to that outcome, the more real the alternate version feels. This is why coming in fourth place in a competition barely stings, but coming in second can replay in your head for years. Fourth place gives your brain nothing to reconstruct. There's too much distance between you and the winner. The story doesn't feel plausible. But second place gives your brain just enough material to build an entire alternate timeline. One where you get the part, the person, the job, the future. And once that timeline exists in your head, some part of you starts grieving it like it was real. You're not mourning what happened. You're mourning what didn't. In 1979, an actor sat across from a director and heard the words every actor waits their whole career to hear. The role was his. Indiana Jones. The part that would go on to define a generation of movies belonged to Tom Selleck. He signed the contract, he measured for the costume, he told people. And then, days before filming, his television network refused to release him from his contract on another show, and the role went to a young actor named Harrison Ford instead. Selleck didn't lose an audition. He lost a future he had already started living in. For years afterward, in interview after interview, he was asked the same question, forced to relive the same fork in the road, forced to imagine, on camera, in public, the version of his life that never got to happen. That's the thing about a near miss with a name attached to it. It doesn't stay in the past. Every time someone brings it up, Your brain has to build the alternate timeline all over again, from scratch. There's a reason this feeling cuts deeper than ordinary disappointment, and it has to do with how your brain is wired to protect what it already has. Psychologists have a name for this too: loss aversion. The idea that losing something hurts roughly twice as much as gaining the equivalent thing feels good. But here's the part most people don't realize. You don't need to have actually had something for your brain to register it as a loss. The moment you got close enough to believe it was going to happen, your brain quietly started treating that outcome as yours. Not officially, not consciously, but somewhere underneath, a claim had already been staked. So when it didn't happen, you weren't just missing out on a possibility, you were losing something you'd already started to hold. This is why almost can feel more violent than never. Never, never touches you. Almost reaches in and then pulls back. Read that sentence again. But there's something else happening here. Something quieter, and in some ways crueler. It's not just about what you lost. It's about what you were told you were. From a young age, most of us are handed a specific, unspoken lesson. The world remembers winners. Nobody has to say it out loud. You absorb it from every trophy shelf that only has room for one name, every headline that only mentions the champion, every story where second place is a footnote at best. Sociologists call the pattern that follows the Matthew effect, the phenomenon where advantage compounds. The winner gets the funding, the fame, the next opportunity, which makes it easier to win again. The one who came close gets almost nothing. Not because the gap in skill was large, but because the world doesn't reward proximity, it rewards outcome. And somewhere along the way, a lot of us quietly absorb that lesson as a verdict on our identity. Not, I came close, but I am the kind of person things almost happen to. It follows you into the next interview, the next relationship, the next attempt, a quiet voice reminding you that you've been here before and you know how it ends. This is where the story gets more personal, because it stops being about competitions and starts being about how you remember your own life. There's a strange rule about human memory, something researchers call the peak end rule. Your brain doesn't remember an experience as a whole. It remembers the most intense moment, and it remembers the ending. That's it. That's what gets stored. Which means if you spent months working towards something, the interviews, the effort, the version of yourself who believed it might actually happen, none of that gets weighted evenly in your memory. What gets weighted is the final 5 seconds, the email, the phone call, the silence afterward. Your brain quietly rewrites the whole experience around that one ending, so that even something that was 90% effort, hope, and growth gets remembered as one sentence. I almost had it, and then I didn't. That's terrifying. This is why some people can look back at an entire year of real progress and describe it in a single, flattened sentence of loss. Not because the year wasn't meaningful, but because your memory isn't built to store meaning. It's built to store endings. And maybe this is the part that explains why the feeling doesn't fully go away, even years later. Social comparison theory says something simple but unsettling. You don't measure your worth in isolation. You measure it against the people closest to your outcome, not the people wildly more successful than you, not the people far behind, the ones right next to you, the one who got the job you didn't, the one who got chosen instead of you, the one whose name replaced yours in a story you thought was going to be about you. That person becomes a permanent measuring stick, not because you're bitter, but because your brain uses proximity as its default unit of comparison. They were the closest available reference point to what your life could have looked like. So even years later, hearing their name can still produce a flicker of something you can't quite name. Not jealousy exactly. Something closer to unfinished business with a version of yourself that never got to exist. There's one more thing worth sitting with, because it explains why some near misses fade in a week, while others stay lodged in you for a decade. Regret theory has a strange finding at its core. We don't regret the things we did as much as we think we will. Bad decisions, embarrassing choices, moments we wish we could take back. The sting fades faster than we expect, because our minds are surprisingly good at justifying our own actions after the fact. We tell ourselves a story where it made sense at the time. But the things we didn't do, the message we didn't send, the risk we didn't take, the moment we hesitated instead of speaking, those don't fade the same way. There's no action to make sense of, no decision to rationalize, just an open loop, sitting there, unresolved. And a near miss is almost always an open loop. It's rarely framed in your memory as, I did everything right and still lost. It's framed as, I was so close, there must have been something I could have done. Which means your mind keeps searching for the missing action, the one thing that would have closed the gap, long after the event itself is over. That search never really finishes, because there's no answer waiting at the end of it, just more variations of the same question running quietly in the background of your life. Maybe the hardest person to lose isn't someone else. It's the person you almost became. Here's the realization underneath all of this. The pain of second best was never really about losing. It was about how close you got to becoming someone else, someone your brain had already started to build a home for, before the door quietly shut. You weren't mourning a trophy, or a title, or a person, or a job. You were mourning a version of yourself that almost got to live. And maybe that's why it never fully leaves, because it was never really about the outcome. It was about identity, about who you were one decision, one email, one moment away from becoming. Some part of you is probably still there, still standing in that almost, still waiting to find out what would have happened if the story had ended differently. It never will. But maybe the real question was never, why almost winning hurts more than losing? Maybe the real question is how many versions of yourself you've quietly buried without ever saying goodbye to them.